What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. I hope that you all had a great Thanksgiving. Unless you eat chitlins. If you eat chitlins, you need to be thrown in Arkham Asylum. How can you eat something that smells as disgusting as what it looks? I came across somebody on Instagram that made a chitlin sandwich absolutely diabolically nasty. What's wrong with you? How do people eat chitlins? I don't understand how people can eat those things, but man, I just hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. And we got blessed with a very phenomenal slate of college football games today. Texas pulled off a massive upset, taking down Texas A&M. We're going to dive into Arch Manning's Superman second half, if Texas deserves to be in the college football playoffs. And then there's a few other topics I want to discuss. Lane Kiffin is now down to Ole Miss and LSU. Florida's out the mix. What does this mean for Florida? Who's next in line? And then James Franklin has been on the heater. And he's only been the head coach of Virginia Tech for, a few weeks now? And what James Franklin is doing shows a lot about Penn State and how that job is perceived within Penn State fans compared to the reality of what it means to take that Penn State job and what James Franklin is showing about Penn State. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications if you live, eat, breathe, and die football. We're talking NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. And let's dive into it. Texas upsets Texas A&M 27-17. This outcome does not surprise me. Texas A&M, as good as what they've been this year, they've had moments when they've looked vulnerable. And we saw a few weeks ago when they had to come back and beat South Carolina down 33 at half that there's moments when Marcel Reed can get really cold. And you had a feeling that eventually Marcel Reed will get cold at the wrong time against a very good team. And that's what happened in this game. And in the SEC, what separates the teams that win most of the times are the ones that end up getting the better quarterback play. And Arch Manning turned into Superman in the second half of this Texas A&M game. He had a huge 35-yard touchdown on the ground, which pretty much iced the game for Texas. And early during the second half, he threw a beautiful touchdown as well. Arch Manning all year long has improved week after week. And he's the tall tale sign of how you can't define somebody based off how they look to start the season. It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. And with the amount of money that Texas put into this year's team, the most expensive roster in college football, they had to beat Texas A&M. Because going 8-4 with this kind of roster, with this amount invested into it, will be an extreme disappointment. And it would have been a huge indictment on Steve Sarkisian to the point when it would have been fair to start having hot seat talks about Sark going into 2026. This is the biggest regular season win that Steve Sarkisian has had at Texas up to this point. A few years ago, when Steve Sarkisian first got to Texas, he said that this was the year this program was building up for. So to go 8-4 would have been an inexplicable disappointment, and one that I felt Steve Sarkisian would have had a hard time being able to swallow. But good thing that his team showed up in this game. The home crowd was absolutely phenomenal. Texas needs more night games. They have one of the best home field atmospheres in college football. You'll be hard pressed to not say that the Texas home crowd also didn't play a factor in them pulling off this upset. Quintravion Wisner had 155 yards, 8.2 yards per carry. He also was another unsung hero in this upset win. So now, with Texas beating Texas A&M, do they deserve to be in the college football playoffs? After all, they are a 3-loss team, and there seems to be this unwritten rule that you can't put a 3-loss team in the college football playoffs. Can you? Or can you? Because based off Texas' resume, I believe they deserve to be in the playoffs this year. They are the first team since 2019 LSU to have 3 top 10 wins in the season. And yes, they did lose to Florida, but Alabama lost in week 1 to Florida State, and nobody really uses that as a knock against them. And with the 3 top 10 wins that Texas has on their resume, that cancels out their ugly loss to Florida. You can't penalize a team for having an upset loss when they have a bunch of other quality wins to cancel out that one inexplicable loss. And if we were to compare Texas to the teams that they could be compared to for the last spot in the CFP, they easily get in over BYU, Utah, whoever ends up going to the Big 12 championship and losing to Texas Tech. They won't make it to the playoffs. The Big 12 is a 1-bid lead. So then it comes down to maybe you're making an argument for Texas over Miami. But at that point, if Miami beats Pitt, Miami should be in the playoffs. And then we start having the conversation about Notre Dame versus Texas. Notre Dame lost the head-to-head to Miami. And I've been very consistent with my stance that Miami hasn't been as good as what Notre Dame has been since that win. But we've seen Miami play enough games since their losses to Louisville and SMU that it's fair to say that they're back on track, and they probably will be compared with Notre Dame. And eventually, Miami has made up all the grass that they lost from those 2 upset losses that they had. So now you're looking at Notre Dame versus Miami. Miami has the head-to-head. They have the most important metric when it comes to determining who gets into the CFP, which is the game on the field, which Miami won. So then you put Miami in and you leave Notre Dame out. Notre Dame's best win is USC. They lost to Texas A&M by 1 point, and they lost by 3 to Miami. And unfortunately, Notre Dame doesn't have enough quality wins to say they should be in over Texas, despite having 3 losses. Strength of schedule does matter. Strength of schedule, strength of wins is something that the committee favors. And like Steve Sarkisian said, what's the point of scheduling a tough out-of-conference opponent like Ohio State in week 1 and you not get any brownie points for that? What's the point of having one of the toughest schedules in college football if you're going to be penalized for it? Yes, the losses matter, but the wins matter just as much. And this is the only team in over 6 years that has had 3 top 10 wins in the season. That has to mean something. Nobody else in the country can say that they have 3 wins against top 10 teams. 3 wins against teams that could be in the playoffs if we don't include Vandy. And Vandy will be a very interesting discussion. I'm very eager to see how the committee talks about Notre Dame after the final playoff rankings are revealed. Because Vanderbilt does have a few quality wins. They beat LSU. If they beat Tennessee, that will also be a huge resume builder for them. But they did lose the head-to-head to Texas, and they did lose to Alabama. But Vandy also does have an argument. But this notion that Texas shouldn't be in the college football playoffs because they're a 3-loss team. Eventually, a 3-loss team is going to get into the playoffs, and Texas should be that first team. They have 3 wins against the top 10. It doesn't matter if they lost to Florida. Their 3 top 10 wins counter out that Florida loss. If you're going to criticize Texas losing to Florida, you got to criticize Alabama for losing to Florida State in week 1. It's just 1 loss. The other wins that Texas has on their resume are better than any other wins that any other team that will be in the playoffs has on their resume. So which one matters? Playing good teams, beating 3 top 10 opponents, or are we going to reward BYU, who, although they have had a pretty good year and a pretty good schedule, their schedule doesn't come anywhere near to the strength of Texas. And I hate to sound like I'm an SEC homer, but one thing that does annoy me is how the strength of the SEC gets downplayed. There's a reason why the SEC has the most teams inside of the college football playoff rankings. And it's not because of bias. It's not because the playoffs have a secret alliance with the SEC conference. It is because the SEC truly is the best and the most deepest conference in college football. It's been like that for over the past 2 decades. And the people that want to push back against that, your whole argument is, oh, well, these SEC teams are overrated. When the SEC has a winning record against the other Power 4 conferences, we could be having a discussion about if the ACC champion even deserves to get in the college football playoffs, because the 5 automatic bids go to the 5 highest rated G5 champions. And right now, I look at the ACC. If we get Virginia, SMU in the ACC championship and Virginia wins, then okay, I understand putting them in. But does that mean Miami should still be in? The ACC's best team is Miami. So does the ACC champion really deserve a spot? And there is a scenario where the ACC does get left out. The ACC is not guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. It goes to the 5 highest rated conference champions. So if you have Tulane, and let's say maybe they show some respect to JMU and they put JMU in, and let's say Pitt is the team that wins the ACC championship, but JMU and Tulane jumped them, there's a scenario where the ACC champion completely gets left out. Now, I don't think that scenario is going to happen more than likely, but I'm just throwing it out there. But when we're talking about the discussion, the debate about if a 3-loss Texas should be in the college football playoffs, are you still going to tweak on their Florida loss and overlook them having 3 wins against top 10 teams? That's one of the strongest arguments that you can make as a 3-loss team, in my opinion. We have a claim that nobody else that's ranked ahead of us that will be in the CFP can say. We beat 3 of the 10 best teams in America this year. Oklahoma, Vandy, and we just smashed a top 4 team. So I don't see any other argument for how you can say Texas doesn't deserve to be in. Well, you got to win the games on your schedule. Okay, cool. You like to criticize the SEC for scheduling these jabroni teams, Bishop Sycamore late in the season. Okay, cool. How about Texas take a book out of Indiana's schedule and they say, you know what, we're just going to schedule a bunch of G5 teams that we can easily beat up on, and we'll take Ohio State off the schedule in week 1. What's the point of playing these tough out-of-conference matchups if they're going to be penalized for playing in them? And yet we're going to award Indiana for not playing a Power 4 opponent and they're out of conference until, I believe, 2028, 2029. Oh, are you kidding me? And then Big Ten coaches like to take shots at the SEC for this conference scheduling, yet their conference isn't halfway as deep as what the SEC is, nor are they playing schedules that are comparable to what Texas has played this year. So to me, with this win, Texas should be in the playoffs. Somebody's going to get left out. It's either going to be Notre Dame, Miami, but Texas has a very strong argument for getting in over those teams. They have 3 wins against top 10 opponents. That's too strong of a data point to simply ignore and leave them out. Lane Kiffin's decision. He is now down to Ole Miss or LSU. Florida has been eliminated from the Lane Kiffin sweepstakes. And to be honest, LSU needs Lane Kiffin more than what Florida did. Florida whiffing on Lane Kiffin, I don't think really hurts them that much. Yes, Lane Kiffin will be the preferred candidate for all Florida fans, especially those inside of the program, the alums, the boosters, Scott Strickland especially. But Jedd Fisch, I think, will be a perfect backup plan for Lane Kiffin. Jedd Fisch is a Gator through and through. He has Gator blood. He was on Steve Spurrier's staff. Not only is he a former Gator, but he also is somebody that, unlike the previous coach that you hired and Billy Napier from the G5, Jedd Fisch has experience in Power 4 conferences. He rebuilt Arizona. He has done a very good job in his 2 years at Washington. I hate how Jedd Fisch is perceived as far as his candidacy for being Florida's next head coach. Florida needs somebody that has Florida DNA running through their veins, and Jedd Fisch would die for this job. Not only is he a very great X's and O's coach, but he's a phenomenal recruiter. Think about this. Jedd Fisch has put together a top 25 recruiting class at Washington, mainly recruiting on the West Coast. You put him down in a swamp and you mix in his West Coast recruiting, his ability to get some of the best recruits out of the state of California, along with the amount of recruiting talent that he's going to have in his backyard in the state of Florida. Florida's recruiting potential is a lot higher with Jedd Fisch than what it is with Lane Kiffin. And if we're being honest, the ceiling, if Florida was to hire Jedd Fisch, will be just as high as what it could be if they had Lane Kiffin. Now, the floor with Jedd Fisch is a lot lower than what it is with Lane Kiffin. With Lane Kiffin, you know, at worst, you're going to get 7 wins per season. At worst. With Jedd Fisch, he could be a massive disaster. He could be a guy that ends up winning 5, maybe 6 games. But I think the chances of that happening are very, very small. Jedd Fisch isn't somebody that's learning on the job. You can say, well, he doesn't have any ties to the SEC. He was on Steve Spurrier's staff. College football is not just this regional sport anymore. You can have a guy come from the West Coast and dominate in the South. If my memory serves me correctly, Urban Meyer came from Utah, right? He didn't have any ties to the South. Did Nick Saban have any ties to the South when he came from Michigan State to LSU? You don't need to have ties to the South to be able to win in the South. If you are a good coach, you're going to be a good coach. It's still the same thing. If you know how to recruit on the West Coast and you were able to bring Arizona a top 25 class who has very limited resources when it comes to football, you can do the same thing anywhere else you go. I believe that Jedd Fisch will be a fantastic hire for Florida. I like him more than I like John Sumrall from Tulane. You really want to try again hiring another G5 coach who doesn't really have that much experience as a head coach to begin with? Did you not learn from your past failure with Billy Napier? Are you really going to double dip again with another G5 coach? Eli Drinkwitz just signed an extension. So it really comes down to Jedd Fisch versus John Sumrall. And I believe Jedd Fisch would be a perfect hire for the University of Florida. He's a great X's and O's coach. He can recruit the West Coast. He also will be able to recruit the state of Florida very effectively. Like, I don't understand this pushback against Jeff Fish. Well, we need a guy that has experience in the SEC. Okay, are you going to hire Brian Kelly? Who else are you going to hire that has proven SEC experience? Well, we need somebody who can win big games. Who out there can you get that has a proven track record of winning big games? You keep throwing out these requirements that a bunch of the candidates that you're going to be picking from don't have. Are you going to get Alex Golish? I mean, he has a winning record against top 25 teams. I guess if you want to count him beating Boise State, no matter where direction Florida chooses to go in their coaching search, you're not going to hire somebody that meets the requirements that a lot of you Florida fans are throwing out that are incredibly unrealistic. You don't want James Franklin. You didn't want James Franklin because, oh, he can't win big games. But James Franklin was the most proven head coach on the market during this coaching carousel outside of Lane Kiffin. And I've heard some arguments against Lane Kiffin saying, well, he's just a vanilla version of James Franklin. Newsflash, the majority of head coaches in this sport have losing records against ranked teams and against top 10 teams. So these requirements, these stipulations that you are throwing out when it comes to who should get the Florida job are unrealistic. If you are looking for the most qualified, somebody that has the most proven track record, you have to go with Jeff Fish. Well, look at his record, JT. His first 2 years at Arizona were rebuilding years. There's a lot of context that gets left out with how Jeff Fish is discussed. Let's stop acting like a lot of people in the South pay attention to college football on the West Coast. Were you really watching Jeff Fish when he was at Arizona? Just be honest. A lot of you guys probably are just now knowing about Jeff Fish. Most of you guys probably don't even know that Jeff Fish was on Steve Spurrier's staff. You probably don't even know that he was a Florida alum. Jeff Fish getting hired by Florida would be one of those hires that the fan base would hate on because they don't know too much about the guy. They don't understand anything about him. But when you start seeing the results, you'll be like, damn, how could we have been so short-sighted about this guy who's just a perfect fit for the program? When you think about the coaches who are having a lot of success at their alma maters, Kenny Dillingham, Brent Key, they're great culture fits because if you were to cut them open, they bleed their school colors. If you cut Jeff Fish open, guess what he bleeds? Not red, orange, and blue. You need somebody like that. You need somebody that taking this Florida job is not just a promotion. It's not just a step up. It's a dream come true. Jeff Fish would die for this job, and that's what Florida needs. You need somebody who really loves this university, who loves this football program, who's going to put his heart and soul into rebuilding a program that folks inside of the program, fans of this program, perceive as a tier 1 job when it's really a tier 2 job. Florida has some good resources. They do have a very good NIL backing as well, but they're not a tier 1 program like how you would believe they are, because if that was the case, Lane Kiffin wouldn't have took you off the list. And this notion that, well, if Florida would have fired Billy Napier last year, we would have already had Lane Kiffin, is false. If Lane Kiffin didn't want to take the Florida job now, what makes you think he would have wanted to take the Florida job last year? Well, it would have been the best opening available. Some would tell you that the Auburn job is much more attractive than the Florida job. The Florida job is a very good job, but not as good as LSU, Auburn, or maybe even Penn State, depending on who you ask. And I'm not saying that to demean Florida. I'm saying that the expectations, the requirements that are being thrown out for what Florida's next head coach needs to look like are incredibly unrealistic. If you would have made the decision a few decades ago between Urban Meyer and whoever else was the finalist for that Florida head coaching job at the time, you probably would have passed on Urban Meyer because he didn't fit your requirements. A lot of your requirements are very misconstrued. Jedd Fisch is a perfect fit for this program. I would love Jedd Fisch to get this Florida job. I would be very terrified of Jedd Fisch if he gets this Florida job. I mean, you passed on Rhett Lashlee. I felt Rhett Lashlee would have been a home run hire. And I don't even think you bothered to interview him. So you're not really picking from a great batch of cookies if you're Florida. Right now, Jedd Fisch will be the best coach right now, who's the most proven, who's been able to win consistently at a Power 4 level, has a bunch of experience in the NFL and college football. It doesn't get no better than Jedd Fisch at this point. Unless you want to experiment with another G5 coach. And we already saw how that experiment panned out last time. James Franklin hasn't even been the head coach of Virginia Tech for over a month. And yet he's already on fire on the recruiting trail. This dude has flipped 4 commits from Penn State to Virginia Tech. And this question gets brought up very often when it comes to James Franklin. Why do recruits want to play for James Franklin, a guy who can't win big games? The answer is simple. Recruits love James Franklin so much, they want to help him change that narrative. They want to be the guys who can come in and say, yeah, we're the ones who helped James Franklin finally defeat his big game demons. We are the guys who are able to help turn around Virginia Tech football and get them back to national relevance, where they were competing for the ACC championship. They're in the college football playoffs. They're playing in these big games. They're winning these big games that their head coach doesn't have the ability to win. James Franklin is showing how overrated the Penn State coaching job truly is. Penn State has to be the most irrelevant blue blood in college football. If you were to name 5 blue blood programs, I don't even think most of you guys would even bring up Penn State. Most will bring up Alabama, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan. You probably bring up Nebraska, Tennessee before you bring up Penn State. If it wasn't for James Franklin, most folks wouldn't even know the history that Penn State has. The Penn State job James Franklin is showing is not as great as what Penn State fans and folks inside that program perceive it to be. If this was the case, guys will be committed to the school. They will be committed to the university and not committed to a coach. When James Franklin got fired, Penn State had 17 decommits, and 4 of those guys in counting are following him to Virginia Tech, a program that doesn't have the history nor the tradition of Penn State. And they definitely, as fantastic as what the Sandman intro is, nothing beats the whiteout. Penn State has one of the best home field environments in college football. And yet these recruits rather play at Virginia Tech, a school that's a lot smaller than what Penn State is, that doesn't have the history because of their love for James Franklin. James Franklin is a top 13 coach in college football. Penn State's going to have a harder time finding a great upgrade from James Franklin than they will being able to find somebody who won't bring the program down a level from where James Franklin had it. You can easily end up in the same situation Florida has been in when they fired Dan Mullen. Florida thought they could find a better upgrade from Dan Mullen, a guy who had them in the SEC championship, multiple New Year's Six bowl games. You could easily end up being what Nebraska currently has been these last couple of years. The Penn State job, if it was as attractive as what is hyped up to be, they wouldn't have lost pretty much their entire recruiting class for this cycle because of the attachment to the guy that they fired. Florida fired Billy Napier. They haven't really had that many decommits. Why? because those players weren't committed to Billy Napier. They were committed to the University of Florida because they grew up idolizing that program. They grew up wanting to be a Gator. I don't think any of these Penn State decommits grew up wanting to play for Penn State. They love James Franklin. Their family fell in love with James Franklin. One thing about James Franklin is that if you are a parent, James Franklin steps into your living room, you hear this brother talk, you believe that not only is this dude going to get the best out of your son as a player, but he's going to mold your son into a great young man. And parents love that. And that's what makes James Franklin such a great recruiter. Drew Allar's dad still was in communication with James Franklin. James Franklin said in his interview on game day after he got fired that Drew Allar's dad hit him up and said, you know, we're supposed to be playing Iowa today. Despite how people feel about James Franklin and how it went with him and Drew Allar not being able to get the most out of him, Drew Allar's family has the utmost respect for this man. The way that a lot of former Penn State players talk about James Franklin, who have played under him, they look at this dude as another father figure to them. Michael Parsons was going to war with a bunch of folks on X with the firing of James Franklin. A lot of former players felt a certain kind of way about how James Franklin was treated. And also, you don't think a lot of these Penn State decommits saw the video of how James Franklin got booed off the field in his final game? A guy who had you one play short of the national championship got booed like hell. You would have thought that James Franklin was the worst head coach in the history of Penn State football, the way that the fan base treated him. Recruits see the interactions between Penn State fans and James Franklin, and they also get turned off by that. Let's not act like the fan base doesn't play a part in these commits decisions as well. They want to be with the fan base that isn't fair weather. They want to be with a fan base that shows the utmost respect to their coaches, their players, whether they are good or not. Look at how Virginia Tech fans talk about Brent Pry. Brent Pry posted a video or a photo on Thanksgiving, and you have Virginia Tech fans saying, "We love you, bro. We wish it would have we wish it would have worked out, but we still appreciate what you done for the program." You didn't see anybody on the Brent Pry's Thanksgiving photo saying, "Oh yeah, you're an absolute trash head coach. You suck. You can't win big games. You were a failure." Recruits see these comments. There's a reason why Penn State has all of these decommits that are flipping to play for James Franklin. It's not just solely because of James Franklin. It's also because of the fan base as well. James Franklin, if you were to disassociate your personal feelings towards James Franklin, whether you love him or hate him, if there was a coach who you would trust more to get the best out of your son, who you would trust to be able to develop him into a young man, how many other coaches are you truly going to feel safe with your son coming in the next 2-3 years of his life to play for, knowing he's in good hands, other than James Franklin? Not too many. James Franklin is one of the few coaches that truly cares about the players. In this age of NIL and the transfer portal, like, guys at Penn State love this dude so much that they decided to come back for one more year to try to go all the way. And even though it didn't work out, if you ask any of those guys who decided to return for one last season, they wouldn't regret the decision. They would do it all over again because those players were willing to go to war for James Franklin. I don't think this team quit on James Franklin. They just weren't as good as what they thought they was. And when they lost to Oregon, that's kind of what lost all the air in the building. But those players love James Franklin. And when you have players that truly love the coach, recruits see that. Recruits, one thing they know is a phony from a guy that's authentic. And one thing about James Franklin, when you hear him talk, when you look at him in the eyes, he's a straight shooter. He's authentic with you. He's going to coach you hard, but he's also going to love you a lot harder. And recruits love that because that's infectious energy. Meanwhile, you have Mike Norvell screaming at the top of his lungs, greeting guys on their recruiting visits. It's not authentic. It's not something that recruits can relate to. It's not something that parents get on board with. Parents love James Franklin. He's an old school kind of coach that a lot of parents fall in love with. And a lot of parents tell their kids, man, you need to go play for that man with that nice shiny bald head.